The stagecoach did not stop so much as spit her out. Its wheels hit the rut outside Vander's crossing, lurched hard, and threw Beatrix Thorne down into September dust before the driver had the decency to pull the brake. Her shoulder struck first, then her knee. Then her hat rolled under the hind wheel and came out flattened with one pale feather ground brown. Nobody moved to help. The town watched from porches and doorways, boots planted, mouths shut, in that mean frontier way that said more than words. A mule tied outside the mercantile flicked its tail. Somewhere behind the livery, a loose shutter knocked and knocked like a hand too weak to come in. Beatrix pushed herself upright. Dust clung to the black hem of her dress. One glove had split along the palm. Blood showed in a thin red line across her knuckles, but she closed that hand around the handle of a battered wooden trunk and dragged it clear of the coach wheel. The trunk scraped over grit with a sound like teeth on bone. The driver tossed down a smaller bundle after her. End of the line. Beatrix looked up at him once. He looked away first. Under her arm she held a worn leather book, dark with weather and oil from many hands. She pressed it tight against her ribs while the coachman slapped the reins. The horses leaned forward. The coach rolled west, taking its dust with it, and leaving her standing before a town that had already judged her cheaper than freight. A woman on the mercantile porch leaned toward another and spoke low, not low enough. Another one with no man to claim her. A boy laughed through his nose. Beatrix bent, picked up her ruined hat, and set it back on her head. The brim sagged over one eye. She did not fix it. Across the street, a broad building of raw pine stood half-made, its roof open to the gray sky. The rafters showed like ribs. Tar paper flapped loose along the east side. Stacks of cedar shingles waited under canvas, and the wet smell of fresh-cut boards carried on the wind. From the dark mouth of that building came a man. He was tall enough to make the doorway look mean. His beard was rough, his shirt patched at one elbow, his right arm bound hard against his chest in splints and stained linen. The hand below the wrap hung swollen and useless, the fingers purple at the nails. He walked like each step had a nail under it, but he did not slow. He stopped 10 feet from Beatrix. Name Beatrix Thorne. Can you climb? She looked past him to the roof pitch. Her eyes moved along the ridge beam down the rafters, across the crooked scaffold, where 2 planks bowed under their own weight. Yes. Can you lay a roof before frost if the wood is sound? His jaw shifted. It ain't sound. Nothing here is. A few men near the blacksmith's wall grinned. One spat brown tobacco into the dust. Gideon Cole jerked his chin toward the open shop. I got no wages. Beatrix said nothing. I got a loft full of sawdust and mice. You can sleep there. You eat what I don't. In return, you put shingles on that roof and keep rain off my tools before the first hard freeze. The mercantile woman gave a small, sharp laugh. A lady roofer, she said. Gideon did not turn. Beatrix lowered her trunk handle and stepped closer to the building. She took in the north wall, the lean of the chimney, the untrimmed rafters, the patches where rain had darkened the boards. Her thumb slid once along the cracked spine of the leather book. Then she turned back. 1 cot, 1 blanket. Ladder holds no. Then I'll fix the ladder first. That took the grin off one man's face. Gideon looked at her split glove, then at the trunk sitting in the dust. For a breath, his good hand twitched as if it might reach for it. Then he closed it into a fist. Suit yourself. Beatrix bent, hooked both hands beneath one end of the trunk, and lifted. The weight dragged her shoulder low. The fresh cut on her knuckles opened again. Blood ran down to her wrist and darkened the cuff. She did not ask. She carried one end. The other end bumped behind her inch by inch toward the carpenter's shop. Behind her, the town stayed still warm under porch roofs, watching a lone woman haul her whole life through the dust. At the threshold, Gideon stepped aside. The shop smelled of cedar iron, cold ashes, and old hurt. Above the unfinished roof let in a thin slice of gray September light. Beatrix set the trunk down inside. A drop of blood fell from her glove onto the clean pine floor. Gideon saw it. So did she. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the first cold wind of the season slipped through the rafters and found every open seam. Before sunup, the first hammer strike rang over Vander's crossing. Not loud, not wild, clean. One nail, one blow. Gideon Cole woke in his chair beside the cold stove with his bad arm throbbing inside the splints. For a moment he thought some fool had come to steal shingles in the dark. Then came the next strike. One nail, one blow. He pushed himself up, crossed the shop, and stepped out beneath the half-made roof. Beatrix Thorne was already above him. She moved along the rafters with her skirt tied tight at the knees, boots braced on wet pine, a chalk line clenched between her teeth. Dawn had not yet warmed the boards. Frost silvered the scaffold ropes. Her breath came white and short, but her hand did not shake. She set a shingle, tapped it true, drove the nail home. No wasted swing, no crooked line, no muttering. The ridge above her made a dark cut against the pale sky. Cedar dust clung to her sleeves. A strip of cloth was tied around the knuckles she had split the day before. It had gone red through the middle. Gideon stood with a coil of rope in his left hand. He watched her measure the pitch by eye, snap the chalk, shift her weight, and lay the next run as straight as a ruled page. The rope slid from his fingers and dropped into the mud. Beatrix looked down. Gideon bent too fast, for it caught pain in his ribs and stopped. His mouth tightened. "You done roofing before he called?" She drove another nail. "Yes. Where men quit before rain came. That was all." By mid-morning, half the east slope wore new cedar. The shop smelled different under it. Less open, less doomed. When the nail keg ran low, Beatrix climbed down, wiped both hands on her apron, and walked to the mercantile. The bell over the door gave a tired jangle. Mrs. Voss, broad-faced and dry-eyed, stood behind the counter with a tin scoop in one hand. Two men were near the cracker barrel. Both stopped talking when Beatrix entered. "I need 8 pounds of 10-penny nails," Beatrix said. Mrs. Voss looked at her skirt first, then her boots, then the torn glove. "Roof nails ain't sewing pins." "I know. You ought to know what a woman's hands are worth before you ruin them." Beatrix laid Gideon's coin on the counter. Mrs. Voss did not touch it. A woman alone taking bed in a man's loft, hammering above town like a hired mule. "There ain't much left to lower, is there?" The men by the barrel stared into their coffee. Beatrix's fingers closed once around the coin. The split cloth over her knuckles darkened as her hand tightened. Then she opened it again. 8 pounds. Mrs. Voss scooped the nails into brown paper and dropped the bundle hard enough to scatter 2 across the counter. Beatrix picked up both loose nails, tucked them back in the paper, and left. Outside, the public stage platform sagged beside the road. One corner had rotted through so bad a child could have put a foot into it and broken a leg clean before supper. Old boards bowed under last night's damp. The town had walked around it for months. Beatrix stopped. She looked at it. Then she took out the leather book. From across the street, Gideon saw her kneel in the dirt and draw the platform in quick lines. Not pretty lines. Working lines. Measurements. Angles. Load points. Her pencil moved like a knife cutting fat from meat. By noon, she had hauled scraps from Gideon's waste pile. By 1, she had pried the rotten boards loose. By 2, she had set bracing under the frame, cut cross pieces, and laid new planks so tight a coin could not slip between them. A wagon rolled over it near dusk. The platform held. Nobody clapped. Mrs. Voss shut her door. The blacksmith turned his back. A man who had watched the whole thing spat once and said, "Waste of good wood." Beatrix gathered her tools without looking at him. Then the light changed. The gray sky went flat as stove ash. A wind came down from the north so sharp it cut through wool and found skin. The horses along the rail lifted their heads at once. The loose shutter behind the livery began knocking again, faster now. Gideon looked up at the unfinished half of the roof. Beatrix did too. A white flake landed on the back of her bleeding hand and did not melt. The first snow came mean. It did not fall soft. It drove sideways hard as thrown salt, striking the east face of the roof where cedar still lay bare. By lantern light, Beatrix worked with her coat buttoned wrong and her jaw set so tight the cords showed in her neck. The shingles froze to her gloves. She warmed nails in her mouth before driving them. Iron bit her tongue. Blood and cold metal left the same taste. Below, Gideon fed boards through the saw one-handed, his right arm tied close and useless. Each time the blade caught his shoulders locked. Each time he reached for what his dead hand could not take, his left hand struck the bench instead. "Come down," he called. Beatrix set another shingle. "Roof won't mend itself, neither will you." She drove the nail clean through. Near noon, hoofbeats broke through the storm. The shop doors flew open. Snow burst in with 6 riders. At their heads stood Corbin Blackwood, wrapped in a black buffalo coat, cheeks red from cold teeth showing under a trimmed mustache. His men came in behind him with mud on their boots and rifles resting low. Gideon turned from the saw. Blackwood looked first at the splinted arm, then up at Beatrix crouched above the rafters. "Well now," he said. Cole hired a hen to finish a bull's work. No one laughed until Blackwood did. Beatrix did not climb down. She stayed on one knee, hammer in hand, snow gathering along her shoulders. Blackwood pulled a folded paper from inside his coat and snapped it open. 48 hours. Gideon's left hand closed around the saw table. "You said first frost." "I said completion upon inspection when weather turns." Weather's turned. Blackwood smiled. "Roof, stage platform, freight shed, tool works, all fit for public use. The core work is done. Then dress it pretty." Blackwood walked deeper in. His boot crushed curls of cedar underfoot. "Should have stayed with cattle, Gideon. A man can lose a herd and still keep his name. But lose a town." He leaned close. "That sticks." A murmur rose outside. Townsfolk had gathered under the mercantile awning, hats white with snow. Mrs. Voss called, "What's he talking about?" Blackwood turned like he had waited for it. "You don't know." He lifted the paper high. "Your Carpenter borrowed against half this crossing. Promised a federal freight stop, public stage house, and works yard before freeze. Missed the mark, the note comes due. Deeds transfer. Lots, shops, corrals. Every plank you stand on, faces changed in the gray light." The blacksmith stepped off the porch. Cole Gideon did not answer. Blackwood clucked his tongue. "Sold 300 head to start it. Put the money into timber, lime, iron survey fees. Then got himself crushed in that east shaft cave-in, dragging 2 fools out before the roof fell. Hands gone near dead now. Shame. Hard to build a future with one good paw." Gideon's mouth went white. A man from the livery shouted, "You mortgaged us, I signed no deed for you," Gideon said. "But you signed enough to hang us," another man snapped. The snow blew through the open roof and melted on the stovepipe, hissing. Beatrix looked from face to face. Men who had watched her bleed on their platform now looked at Gideon as if he had brought sickness in his coat. Mrs. Voss took one step back. "You should have told us." Gideon's head lowered an inch. "I tried to build the stop before winter." "You tried with our lives," the blacksmith said. Blackwood folded the paper slow. "Noonday after tomorrow, I come with the marshal's seal. If this town ain't finished, it ain't yours." He walked to the door, then glanced up at Beatrix. "And you miss. Find warmer dirt to sleep on." The riders left with laughter trailing behind their horses. Gideon stood in the doorway as the town backed away from him, one porch at a time. Above him, Beatrix set her hammer down in the snow and looked at the half-bare roof where the storm had begun to undo the work. By dark, the storm had taken the roof. Snow packed itself between the rafters and hardened there. The tar paper snapped loose and beat against the frame like a trapped bird. Every shingle Beatrix touched wore a skin of ice. Nails slipped from her fingers and vanished white below. Gideon climbed 3 rungs of the ladder before his bad arm struck the side rail. He stopped with his teeth bared. "Get down!" Beatrix braced one boot against the ridge beam. "Hold the ladder." "It won't hold me." "Then hold your tongue." A gust hit the open side of the shop and drove snow clear across the floor. The lantern flame leaned flat inside its glass. Down below, Gideon stood with his left hand wrapped around the ladder knuckles, pale boots planted in slush and sawdust. Beatrix swung. The hammer glanced off the nail head and tore skin from her thumb. Red spread under the frost bright for 1 second, then dulled. Gideon saw it. Enough. She reached for another nail. The wind took the canvas from the shingle stack and sent it whipping into the dark. By midnight, they had lost more ground than they had gained. The roof groaned under the packed snow. Water dripped through gaps and struck Gideon's workbench, one cold drop after another. His tools lay under sacks. His saw blade had a line of ice along its teeth. The stove smoked because the chimney draft was wrong, and the whole shop smelled of wet ash, cedar sap, and iron rust. Beatrix came down at last. Her legs shook when her boots met the floor. She hid it by bending for the fallen nails. Gideon did not speak. He pulled a tin cup from the shelf, poured coffee gone thick and bitter, and set it near her hand. She did not drink. Outside, laughter rolled from the saloon across the street. Blackwood's men had taken the big table by the window. Lamplight showed their hats, their open mouths, the swing of a bottle passing hand to hand. Then came the crack. Not thunder. Wood. Gideon turned first. A second crack split the storm. Then a heavy crash shook the east wall. Beatrix ran to the door. The scaffold lay broken in the snow. Its side braces had been chopped through clean. The planks were scattered like bones below the roofline. One support post still stood hacked nearly in two, the fresh wound pale against old, weathered grain. Across the street, one of Blackwood's men raised his bottle toward the shop window. Gideon stepped out into the snow without coat or hat. Beatrix caught his sleeve. He tore free and went to the scaffold boots sinking to the ankle. He put his left hand on the cut brace. His fingers moved over the axe marks once, twice. Then his hand fell. The storm filled the space between them. Beatrix stood behind him, hair torn loose from its pins, face wet from blown snow. "We can brace from the inside," she said. "No. The west stack has long beams. No. I can rig a crawlboard off the ridge." He turned on her so fast, she stopped. His eyes were black pits in a face cut hollow by cold and lamplight. Snow sat on his beard and did not melt. "Take your trunk." She did not move. "Take it," he said, "and get out." The saloon roared again across the road. Gideon's voice dropped low enough that the storm nearly swallowed it. "This place is dead. You don't need to bury yourself with me." Beatrix's hand stayed half raised between them. He looked at it, at the torn thumb, at the cloth gone stiff over her knuckles. Then he walked past her into the shop and shut the door hard enough to shake snow from the rafters. She stood there until the cold found the wet places in her sleeves. In the loft, the sawdust smelled damp and sour. Her trunk sat where she had left it. The one blanket lay folded on the straw tick. Below, Gideon moved once, then the shop went still. Beatrix sat in the dark with her hands open on her knees. The skin across her palms had split in small white lines. Her thumb pulsed. A drop of water slid from her chin, stopped at the edge, and froze before it fell. Across the street, Blackwood's men sang off-key. Beatrix reached for the leather book. She opened it to the last marked page, took out a pencil, shaved short as a matchstick, and began setting down numbers in the dark. Morning came without mercy. The storm quit before dawn, leaving Vander's crossing buried to the knees and white as a shroud. The sky had cleared hard and blue. Every sound carried too far, a hinge crying at the mercantile, a horse blowing steam, a shovel biting crusted snow. At noon, Corbin Blackwood rode in. He brought 6 men, a town clerk, and a marshal with a seal press in a leather satchel. Blackwood's coat was brushed clean. His boots were polished black to the knee. He looked at the broken scaffold lying under snow and smiled like he had found ripe fruit on the ground. The town gathered without being called. Mrs. Voss stood on the mercantile step with her shawl pulled to her chin. The blacksmith kept his eyes on Gideon's shop, then looked away when Gideon came out. Gideon stood in the doorway. He had not shaved. His right arm hung bound against him. His left hand gripped the doorframe so hard the old splintered pine cut into his palm. Blackwood stepped down from his horse and pulled the contract from inside his coat. Time. No one answered. He dropped the paper into the muddy snow at Gideon's feet. Roof open. Scaffold wrecked. Freight shed unfinished. Works yard unfit. He turned to the marshal. Mark it. The marshal opened his satchel. Gideon looked once toward the loft window. It was empty. Blackwood saw the look and laughed through his nose. Your hen flew. The clerk bent over the paper with a pen. Then the shop door opened wider. Beatrix Thorne stepped out. Her dress was stiff with dried snow. Her hair was pinned back plain. The torn glove was gone, and both hands showed raw and cracked in the cold. Under one arm she carried the leather book. She walked past Gideon. He took one step as if to stop her, then did not. Beatrix crossed the yard. Snow broke under her boots with small, sharp snaps. She stopped before Blackwood and looked at the contract in the mud. Blackwood tipped his hat. Miss Thorne, come to beg for the cripple. She lifted the leather book and threw it into his chest. He caught it badly. The crowd went still. Blackwood's smile thinned. Mind your hand. Beatrix said one word. Read. He opened the book. At first he frowned like a man smelling smoke. Then his eyes stopped on the seal pressed deep into the first page. He touched it with his thumb. His face drained by inches. The marshal stepped closer. Beatrix's voice cut clear across the frozen yard. Beatrix Thorne, Chief Engineer, Federal Planning Commission. Assigned to inspect public freight stops, stage houses, and works yards on the northern route. Mrs. Voss put one hand to the porch rail. Beatrix did not look at her. For 6 days, I measured every sill brace, rafter, joist, platform, plank, chimney line, load, point nail run, and drainage cut on this property. Blackwood shut the book. The marshal held out his hand. Give it here. Blackwood did not move. The marshal took it from him. Beatrix pointed to the shop. Core structure is complete. Roof frame meets federal pitch. Stage platform bears wagon load. Freight shed foundation is plumb. Works yard drainage passes. Gideon Cole met the public use terms before weather turned. The clerk's pen hung above the page. Blackwood swallowed. That roof ain't closed. Roof covering was hindered by storm. Her eyes moved to the scaffold, and by axe work. Blackwood's men shifted in their saddles. Beatrix took 3 steps to the broken brace and kicked snow from the pale cut. Fresh marks, 2-bit axe, same width as the blade on Mr. Harlan's saddle there. Harlan's hand left his reins. The marshal turned. Beatrix opened the book to the final page and held it out. That scaffold was logged as federal inspection property at sundown yesterday. Damage to marked federal works during inspection is not debt collection. It is sabotage. The word landed harder than the cold. Blackwood's mouth opened, but nothing came. The marshal looked at Harlan. Dismount. Harlan did not. The marshal's hand went to his belt. Now. One by one, Blackwood's riders looked away from their boss. Blackwood backed toward his horse. This is a trick. Beatrix picked up the muddy contract and held it out to him. No, this is paper. She let it fall. And you built your kingdom on it. The wind slid through the street. No one laughed now. Blackwood mounted with fingers that missed the stirrup twice. His horse wheeled hard, throwing mud across the contract as he rode out his men, breaking apart behind him like crows from a dead field. The marshal kept the leather book. The clerk tore Blackwood's claim down the middle. All along the street, hats came off. Mrs. Voss stepped down once, then stopped. The blacksmith stared at the stage platform Beatrix had mended and rubbed both hands over his face. Gideon stood where she had left him, his cut palm open at his side. Beatrix walked back through the town's silence and did not give any of them her eyes. By late afternoon, the sun had dropped behind the white ridge west of Vander's crossing, and the town lay washed in cold brass light. No man raised his voice. The marshal had taken Harlan and 2 riders to the jail room behind the clerk's office. Blackwood's tracks still scarred the road, already freezing hard. The torn contract lay in the mud by the shop steps until the wind worried one half loose and sent it skittering under the horse trough. Inside the carpenter's shop, Beatrix climbed the ladder with a bundle of cedar shingles under one arm. The scaffold was gone. Gideon had braced a new crawl board from the inside, slow work done with one hand, wedges and teeth set hard enough to crack. Neither of them had spoken over it. He held. She climbed. That was all the bargain needed now. At the foot of the stairs, Mrs. Voss stood with a covered dish wrapped in blue cloth. Behind her came the blacksmith with a sack of flour. The liveryman held a side of bacon. 2 women carried coffee beans, dried apples, and a pie with steam breathing through the split-top crust. They stopped where sawdust met snow. Mrs. Voss cleared her throat. The sound broke wrong. "Miss Thorne." Beatrix set one boot on the ladder rung. Mrs. Voss gripped the dish so tight her knuckles sank white. "We brought supper." No answer. "And coffee." Beatrix climbed another rung. The blacksmith took off his hat. His hair was flattened with sweat, though the air was cold. "That platform you fixed. My little girl uses it every school day." Beatrix kept climbing. Mrs. Voss looked toward Gideon. He stood by the workbench, his splinted arm against his chest, a nail held between his teeth. He did not help her. Mrs. Voss stepped forward, then stopped when Beatrix's boot scraped higher above her head. "I said things." The ladder creaked. "Mean things." Beatrix reached the roof edge and pulled herself onto the crawl board. Mrs. Voss's mouth stayed open a while longer, but no more words came. She set the covered dish on the first stair. One by one, the others laid their offerings beside it. Food piled there in the dusk, rich and late. Beatrix did not look down. The town had fed her silence for 6 days. Now it had to eat from its own hand. On the roof, the wind was sharp enough to water the eyes. Beatrix knelt at the crown where 6 cedar boards waited. The storm had stripped the air clean. Every nail strike rang across the street, past the mercantile, past the stage platform, out into the frozen fields. One board, then another. Gideon came up the ladder slow. In his left hand he carried 2 tin cups hooked by their handles. Coffee steamed from both bitter and black. He set one beside her knee and lowered himself onto the roof with a rough breath. For a time only the hammer spoke. Beatrix drove the 5th board home, then the 6th. She ran her bare fingers along the seam, tight, straight, no place for wind to put its teeth. Gideon looked at the ridge, then at her hands. He reached into his shirt pocket and took out a clean strip of linen. Not new, washed soft, folded square. He laid it between them. Beatrix looked at it. Then she held out her right hand. He rapped her split knuckles with his left, slow and clumsy, but firm. His thumb brushed the edge of her palm once and stopped there. Neither pulled away. Below Vander's crossing stood under its finished roofline, smaller than it had been that morning. Gideon handed her the coffee. "You staying?" Beatrix looked through the open loft window. Her trunk sat in the sawdust, still shut. The ruined hat lay on top of it, feather brown with old road dust. She took one drink. The cup hid her mouth, but not the faint lift at one corner of it. "Roof needs watching." Gideon nodded once. The last sun slid off the cedar. Under their boots, the shop held quiet and whole, with no crack left